I guess I get to approach this from a much more academic standpoint, which is interesting. So this looks familiar, right? From about 5 minutes ago. I guess I have a bit more of a history with this. So it was actually originally developed by a nutritionist at Cornell, who was actually a neighbor of mine growing up. And I actually think it's one of the best papers in nutrition. She talks about whether food insecurity should be an outcome or a predictor. And her gist is that it is an important outcome, so that we should be concerned about it. Because nutritionists prior to 1990 always just said, well, geez, these people don't have enough food, therefore this is what they're going to eat. And instead we should stop it, they don't have enough food, and deal with it. Since that time, her name is Kathy Campbell, she actually gave up nutrition in quite a dramatic way at one point and became an Episcopal priest in Winnipeg, Manitoba. So that's the history of where that comes from. Next slide. So how do we measure it? USC obviously has taken over food insecurity to a big extent in this country, and they came up with a measurement that was based on that definition by Kathy Campbell and one of her students at Cornell, named Kathy Ravinier. And they did a lot. They went out and they talked to a lot of people who were food insecure, and then they came up with a scale to measure it, and it's been used ad nauseum across the board. And basically they categorize people as food insecure, so there's no issues, food insecure without hunger, and that's the questions that relate to, there's this anxiety around whether or not they have enough food. So today they do, but maybe next week they won't, and sometime in the past they probably haven't. When I work with communities in East San Jose, this is where most of our people fall out. There's food insecure with moderate hunger, which is basically adults in the household skip meals, and food insecure with severe hunger, and that's where kids in the household skip meals. The original research by Campbell and most of her students sort of found that kids, if your kids going hungry is really bad, because you usually try and protect giving your kids food. You're going to have to go without meals for months and weeks before your kids go. Next slide. So, in the current population survey estimates that about 11% of American households are food insecure. 65% of Hispanic households, however, are food insecure. And it's, I think, to a large extent, it's because they either are afraid or don't know how, or don't want to apply for food stamps or other government benefits. So non-citizens, mostly undocumented Hispanics, are twice as likely to be food insecure as citizens. And that's because if they fill out that paperwork, they're really afraid that they'll be deported. So it looks government-like, it has USDA on the top. They're not going to fill it out if they're not a citizen, because they're sure someone's going to track them down. They lack the social integration and language skills to complete forms. If you ever look at them, they're tough. They go on and on about your income and your gross income. It's really a hard form to fill out. And they, in general, lack trust in community agencies just because they're here illegally. Next slide. A few more households with kids. Kids are a burden on your food supply. I know that well. So 17% of households with children report some level of food insecurity. And this research is really shaky. There isn't actually a lot of it done, and most of it's not done all that well. But in general, food insecure children have inadequate diets, poor academic performance, behavioral problems, and weight problems. The issue with this is it's all correlational research. So we don't know if the food insecurity comes first or the weight problems come first. Next one. A number of years, this data was collected in about 1997, so this was when I first came, and I piggybacked on an intervention study that was happening in East San Jose, and it was done in the schools with 5th grade kids. And so I wanted to look at whether, at the time, I'll back up a step. At the time, there was a couple papers that came out that showed that food stamps actually, they thought food stamps were causing obesity. I sort of addressed that correlational issue. They thought it was causing obesity because people thought that once you got your food stamps, you went to the store, you bought a whole bunch of food, you ate it all, and then you didn't have anything. And so you were in this yo-yo dieting sort of effect. And they showed it with women more than anybody else. So, but I thought I was interested in seeing if that actually happened with kids. So if there was this, you got a lot of food, you ate it, you didn't have a lot of food. So this sort of restriction thing that basically metabolically would mimic yo-yo diet. So we got a sample of 102, I think, kids. I'm not sure, 18 and 43, 123 kids. And their BMI was at the 73rd percentile. To be classified as overweight, you're at the 85th percentile. The average BMI of the food-secure kids was actually slightly higher, but definitely not significantly higher than the food-insecure kids. Next slide. What we did see though, however, and we didn't actually design it to do this, but we did food recalls over the period of a month. And when we sort of just guesstimated that people got paid or got their food stamps every 2 weeks, when we looked at food secure, food insecure, and food insecure with hunger, we found that there was a much more significant drop in caloric intake as payday approached. So there probably is this sort of yo-yo dieting thing going on. You have to realize it's about 1,000 calories over a 14-day period, so that's like less than 100 calories a day. It's not huge amounts, but there is definitely a much more precipitous drop as payday approaches because they're running out of food in food insecure families than there is in food secure families. So definitely these kids are experiencing some form of restriction and definitely some anxiety around food. Next one. There we go. This is just interesting to me, and it's always a hard slide to describe. I was also interested in parenting behavior, so how kids parent their kids around food. And the three things that are sort of important, well, the two things that are in the literature are pressure to eat. So if I keep saying eat your vegetables, eat your vegetables, eat your vegetables, you're likely to be heavier. And restriction, if I say don't eat the candy, you're likely to be heavier. And then we developed a scale, attitudes towards providing healthy food. So whether or not I thought it was important to give my kids healthy food. And what we saw was pressure to eat always comes out on top. So if I make you eat those vegetables, you're not going to eat them and you're going to be heavier. And it was as we would expect in the food secure families. Restriction is what I wasn't the only one. There's many people sort of looking at this in the literature at that time. And they thought that the idea of if I wasn't able, it might not be candy, but if I had to say to you, geez, we don't have enough food, we're worried about it, that the food insecure kids who are experiencing that restriction probably on a more frequent level would be more overweight. We didn't see that at all. And I think it's because the questions, I think this was actually more for me a lesson in that they're just it's a different ball of wax. It's not like dealing with food secure families. So those questions totally bombed with food insecure families. So to say, do you ever restrict food from your kids? They go, I would never ever do that. Because it's just like such a, if you're experiencing that and you have to do that, you don't do it for the same reasons as somebody who just wants their kid not to eat a lot of candy would do it. So those questions just kind of, they would look at you and they go, whoa, it doesn't make sense to me. So I think our results don't make sense slightly because of that. And then the attitudes towards providing healthy foods was how important is it that you give your kids fruits and vegetables? It was negatively related to kids' weight in the food insecure families, and I think it's because it was more, they knew they weren't able to do it and they were really concerned about it and they spent a lot of time thinking about it and their kids were thinner. So they had this skinny kid and they're going, geez, I don't have enough to feed them, and they felt that was like really powerful to them. So I think the results were interesting to me. I don't think they painted the whole picture that I would have liked them to. Next slide. Okay. So basically my research has always been much more intervention, much more doing things than it has been correlational. So all of this was leading up to an intervention that we wanted to do. And in general, so before we started our intervention, we sort of sat down and thought about how we were going to address the food insecure issue that we know would happen in this population. And first we found out that children were not really underweight or undernourished, although there was that underlying anxiety, and I do believe that's there in food insecure families. Second, and I think this is sort of at the heart of a lot of what we do, is that the quality of foods consumed, not just the quantity of food, is important to reduce health inequities. So that's kind of very important to me, and I sort of stress that over and over with the people I work with. And third, the intervention strategies must recognize the economic restrictions that some families experience without compromising the targeted behaviors. So, next slide. So based on these principles, we developed an intervention. And we recruited families of Mexican-American children aged 6 to 9, and we put them into 2 groups. The first group had standard nutrition sessions that you receive a WIC or any kind of, nutrition ed program you'd go to. And the second one was that we had home-based behavioral nutrition sessions where we sent somebody who was very culturally astute into their home. We measured height, weight of mom, kid, and anybody who did a lot of cooking. So if there was the grandma who lived there, we measured her. We did household food inventories, which was incredibly eye-opening. So we looked at every morsel of food in their homes. Sometimes it took us 15 minutes because there was, the first couple I went and did, and I went, okay, we can do this, because it was taking like 15 minutes. It could take up to 3 hours. If there was a fair bit of hoarding, there were garages full of food. What else? We measured food security, food acquisition.